important message, and I want to give you some background to it. These next two Sundays, we're going to deal with Jesus among the Abrahamic religions. And so I call this sort of a long-standing sibling rivalry. My own title for this is that it is a sibling rivalry characterized by schism and schizophrenia. And so there's a lot of things you can go into on that, but I will treat that at some point. But these are paradigms in motion. And so one of the things that I think you should realize that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all emerged out of ancient Near East in kind of the same region. And you'll see why I say they're siblings, because they all claim Abraham as their father. Two of them, Judaism and Christianity, claim Isaac as the child of promise, whereas Muhammad proclaimed that Ishmael was the child of promise, which makes sense in some ways. You have to think about the logic of the argument, because Ishmael is the firstborn. He's about 14 years older than Isaac, and so therefore he, by the laws of primogeniture, he is the actual heir of the father Abraham. He is the firstborn son. So we'll click through this. Let's see. So here's a promise that God made, and you find it in Genesis. And this promise is, I will surely bless you. This was made to Abraham. He says, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Genesis. The offspring. So this could be both Ishmael and Isaac, but as it's realized in Judaism, that the heir flows through Isaac and Jacob, the patriarchs, and you have the whole lineage of Judaism, the 12 tribes. But there's another promise that I think we should realize as well. And for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. That's it. That's just a few chapters away where he makes the promise. But it's not a contradiction in any way, because the promise was to Abraham and his offspring, of which Ishmael is. And he is going to be a great nation too. If you know the background settings, basically they expected that they were going to, Abraham and Sarah expected that they were going to produce children, and they got into their 90s. Sarah was 90, Abraham was 100 years old, no children. So about 14 years before Abraham turned 100, Sarah told Abraham, take my maidservant Hagar and conceive with her, because she's a fertile young woman. And so he does, and that's when Ishmael was born. But God tells Sarah, look, my promise wasn't with Hagar, or my covenant was not with Hagar, but it was with you, and therefore you're going to have a son too, which causes a lot of laughter because she's 90 years old. And I mean, I don't know why she was laughing. It was at her own, she thought, infertility or Abraham's performance skills. This is pre-Viagra by far. And so this is one of those things where you have to realize, that getting up in age has its drawbacks. But this is, both children are born in late age, 14 years apart. This is when Hagar has been driven away by Sarah, and she's with her teenage son. They run out of water, and so she tells him to lie under a bush, and she's just going to wait for him. She doesn't want to hear him crying when he dies, as he goes into his last death throes. He goes, but the angel of the Lord says, I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is this matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. And it says right there in Genesis that Ishmael becomes the father of all the Arabian nations. So I just want to say that there's a sibling rivalry there. And when Muhammad gets a hold of this, he milks it for all he can with the fact that Ishmael is the firstborn son, and the laws of primogeniture, firstborn, should apply. Here's trajectories of tradition, though, that I think we ought to understand that sort of accumulate in this sort of, I want to call it an open market, but it's a free cultural exchange in the ancient Near East. And in ancient Mediterranean background, we have to go back. If you ever took a course in Western civilization, they take you back through, sometimes there are book titles that say, civilization began in Sumer. But you know some of these. You probably heard of, you may have heard of Akkadian. I know I heard a lot of Akkadian when I was at UCLA and I studied with Stanislav Sagert, who was the foremost Northwestern Semiticist on the planet. He invented the grammar Ugaritic for Ugaritic. Ugaritic were these clay tablets that they found. They found thousands of them. And the Ugaritic had to be deciphered, but we had means to decipher it. And he was one of the foremost experts in Ugaritic because it was what's called a Proto-Semitic language. It was one of the languages that informed Hebrew, which is a Semitic language. Akkadian was a Semitic language. And so if you remember, anybody remember where Abraham came from? It's a little Bible chessboard. Ur of the Chaldees. You ever hear that? Ur, the most ancient city on the planet. Ur. We use that to refer to ancient stuff like Urgeist, or ancient spirit, something like that. But Ur, it was the city of Chaldea, which Abraham came from. He came from which is part of Babylonia. So we see Babylon. I misspelled that. That's Egyptian. That's my spelling at 2 o'clock in the morning is not so good. That should be Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Babylonian, Persian, especially Zoroastrian apocalypticism. And I'm going to get into that. That is Zoroastrian apocalypticism is a very important contribution in this cultural milieu. And I'll get into that a bit. Israel, Judaism as the repository of the ancient Near Eastern context and content, and new revelations. So basically what I'm saying here is that there is a lot that is in common with the ancient Near East that the Bible picks up on. It takes the Babylonian creation story, it transforms it into a theological proposition. It does that with the flood story. We know the flood story pre-existed the Bible by about 1,000 years. It's in the Epic of Gilgamesh, if you ever came across that. And Noah's name is Utnapishtim. Try that one, Utnapishtim. Hey, where's Utnapishtim? Have you seen him around lately? Oh, that sounds like something Utnapishtim would say. It's kind of but it's an ancient Mesopotamian name, a Babylonian name, and that's the person who the gods are going to destroy the earth, and they tell you to build an ark, very much similar in dimensions to the ark that Noah built. So that story was around and modified to make a particular Jewish theological statement that the one God watches out for the elect people. And so he destroys the evil people of the earth with a flood, but he has survivors and survived with the flood. That was Noah. So I want to say it's a repository of ancient Near Eastern context and content and a new revelation. What is that new revelation? That's the revelation of Moses up on Sinai. It comes down with the plates and the carved in stone. But there's a new revelation, Mosaic law. And much of Mosaic law can be found in older law codes, such as the Code of Hammurabi, but it's modified. There's some really nice additions there. One of them that I think is really interesting is that the rights of animals It's not in the Code of Hammurabi. You can't, but in the law of Moses, you can't match a mule or a donkey and an ox to do the same work because it's unfair. It's unfair distribution of labor. And there's a few other things like that. You can't overburden a camel or a donkey with too much weight. That's unfair. So there's some elements that are kind of interesting additions to the law of Hammurabi, hence Moses' new revelation. Christianity is itself a splinter of Judaism. It's a splinter Judaism. It's sectarian, schismatic, and borderline schizophrenic, blend of Semitic and Hellenic Greco-Roman constructs through the prism of a new revelation. So Jesus manifested in the Mediterranean world, in the Greco-Roman culture, and there's a lot in common. You can find elements in Christianity of Platonism, of Stoicism, a lot of things come together, but there's a new revelation that binds it together, that Jesus is the revelation of God as God. And that's an important idea. Islam itself is a Semitic, Abrahamic, prophetic religion. A lot of people don't realize that, but I think we're starting to realize that. They claim Father Abraham. Muhammad was a prophet. He has a lot of the Mosaic concerns about, he follows Mosaic law in many regards, especially what they call halal, which is another word for kosher. Basically exactly the same kosher laws, food, dietary expectations from the Mosaic law are found in Islam. So what is it that Muslims won't eat? Pork. I don't eat no pig. No, I don't eat pig. You'll see Muslims will be very careful that there are no pork products in a meal. And they're very, and you might see like places that say halal on a meat market. That just means kosher. That's Islamic kosher, and they follow pretty much those precepts. So it is kind of a splinter off of Judaism. I think that it's very interesting what we know from the Quran and the Hadith of Muhammad is that he was exposed to Nestorian Christianity. His wife, Khadijah, had a cousin who was a Christian bishop who came and listened to Muhammad's idea. He says, well, no, I think this is a revelation from God. So he was confirmed by a Christian. He had conversations with Nestorian Christians, which is probably accounts for Muhammad's Christology, that Jesus cannot be the Son of God. I'll get into that more next week. The things that Islam does not accept, but they actually accept Jesus in their canon of prophets. Jesus is a great prophet. The closest one to me, says Muhammad, of all the prophets is Jesus of Nazareth, son of Mary, they call him, born of the Virgin Mary. It's a very high Christology, but they won't go, God can't have sons. The Christians misunderstood that. So in many ways, Islam sees itself as a corrective of both Judaism and Christianity, which accounts for the fact that Muhammad wrote letters. Muhammad, after his battles, he had won and he had consolidated that Arabian Peninsula, he felt that the God was there, and it was now time to unite the sibling rivalry between the Jews and the Christians. He wrote a letter. That we have fragments of that letter. We have that letter that he wrote to the Jews saying, look, good news. I've solved the problem between you and the Christians. You Jews need to recognize that Jesus is your Messiah. What more could you expect from a Messiah? That's what Muhammad says. What more could you expect from a Messiah? You're not going to get a better Messiah than Jesus of Nazareth. He is your Messiah. But good news as well, you're right, he's not the Son of God because God can't have sons. And he treats it as a biological thing. So it's a corrective. Neither the Christians nor the Jews were too happy to receive their letters from Muhammad. It was kind of like one of those things, thanks, but no thanks. Thanks for thinking of me. I'll get back to you. Which was before that point, actually, you know that Muslims pray 5 times a day. It's up from the 3 times a day that Jews pray. It's now 5 times a day. And they were originally bowing towards Jerusalem, but then they changed it when the Jews rejected Muhammad's attempted liaison. They rejected it completely. And so that kind of soured him towards Judaism. And so then they started bowing towards Mecca when they pray. So it does have a new revelation. In fact, one of the claims of Muhammad, not only is this a new, updated version, this is like a Microsoft upgrade to both Judaism and Christianity, but it is a new revelation and the final revelation, because this Quran is the complete and all you need to know message from God. And so that's the final revelation. It's very important to recognize this claim to new revelation. Here's some things that were in the background that Judaism was Christianity and Islam were exposed to. One of them is, I think it's very interesting, this is a scene of Egyptian judgment. And this is the way of the soul or the conscience, which is called ma'at. It's like a little black box that you're born with. And when you come to judgment, your heart records all the thoughts and deeds of your life, and it's weighed. And you see, this is Anubis weighing the heart against a feather. So the idea of if your heart is light and it's not burdened down by guilt, you get to go into a blessed afterlife. So here's something that was not in early Judaism, is the idea of an eternal reward and some sort of personal accountability, that you come before the gods, in this case in Egypt, but before God in personal accountability. Of course, you do realize that is a later part of Judaism that they pick up, but that's it. There's personal accountability and the possibility of a blessed afterlife, which it wasn't until after exposure to Babylon that you see in the Jewish scriptures a kind of thinking about some sort of afterlife, which is termed the resurrection of the just, the resurrection of the righteous. Zoroaster, I would have to include Zoroaster in the family. I want to say, is he a stepbrother? I would think he's a not too distant cousin. He's a close cousin. Zoroaster is a prophet. He may have lived contemporaneous with Moses. He certainly was at least the time of Isaiah. But Zoroastrianism was the religion of Persia, and it became the religion of Cyrus the Great, who this is a tremendous watershed in Jewish history, when they were conquered by the Babylonians. And the Babylonians had a great idea. When they conquered people, they just took them and they absorbed them and assimilated them into the land. And via cultural dissemination, those people's sense of who they were was absorbed into the grand culture of Great Babylon. And that worked with practically everybody except the Jews. And fortunately, they weren't there for that long. They weren't there for a whole century. Some of them stayed on afterwards because they basically, what the Babylonians, they took the elite of the people, the priests and the wealthy, the kings, and the royalty, and they took them, they absorbed them in, and they gave them a pretty good life there. And a lot of the Jewish scribes maintained their Jewish identity under Babylonian auspices, under Cyrus the Great. And it's really great to see the Cyrus cylinder if you go to the University of London, where Cyrus makes a decree that's actually duplicated with one exception. The Cyrus decree says, God came and told me, but he says, he uses Marduk, and he says, my God Marduk came and told me to restore the Jews to their lands and to restore their temple, and he gave them money to do that. But in Ezra, it puts the name of Yahweh in place of Marduk. It makes a slight little editorial change, which is kind of interesting. It's interesting because when we have documents, they coincide with the biblical text to compare the judiciously. So Zoroaster was a prophet, and he had one thing. He says there's only one God, and all idols and idolatry is wrong, and there is going to be a judgment, and that judgment is going to discern the righteous from the unrighteous, and those people who have bought the lie from those who have not bought the lie. And we want to go, wow, what's that? What's the lie? Anybody ever see that 300 about the Spartans who fought off after Xerxes the great king? Well, it's the battle of Thermopylae, and it's the Spartans that were able to stave off the attack of the Persian army. The reason why Xerxes was attacking the Greeks, because they hadn't succumbed to the lie yet, but they had a propensity that they might succumb to the lie. So he launched a preemptive war to prevent them from falling into the lie. Very noble of him, right? But at any rate, Zoroastrianism this is an ancient crystallization of a deep-rooted prehistoric mythology that we can find traces of it that go back to Africa. This mythology is basically about really a war between the gods, and there are gods and demons, and you can see that mythology reflected worldwide, that there's a kind of a cosmic war, a cosmic conflict, but Zoroaster crystallizes it into some very specific details. First of all, it's about accountability. There's going to be personal accountability. Every person who dies is going to have to personally stand before judgment. And the way you do it is you will come in your dreams or in this other world, you'll find yourself wandering, and you come to a point where you come to a bridge, and it's the Chinbot Bridge. And if your soul is good, it'll be broad and wide, and across the other side is a beautiful soul beckoning you. But if your thoughts and deeds are evil, it's as narrow as a razor blade. There's no way you can cross it, and you'll fall into the pit, the lake of fire. Well, anyways, that's part of Zoroastrian. You can find that in Zoroaster, in their texts that have survived. There's a very small group of Zoroastrians, Zarathustrians, they're sometimes called on the planet today, but we do have those texts that allow us to make for an interesting comparison. But they really crystallize that apocalypticism, that idea of an eschatological war between light and dark, which you find in, this is a good versus evil and a culminating battle led by a Savior, leading to a final judgment day and universal restoration after a cleansing by fire. Does that sound familiar to you? Have you ever come across that? Anybody ever read the late great Planet Earth, or see the Left Behind series? Or, hey, if you read the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, or if you read the book of Revelation, or if you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, you'll see there is that. I'll point that out there. But one of the things that Zoroaster said, one of the things that they had is that they were against all reptiles. Basically, reptiles want to rule the world. There's serpents, they're demonic. And so part of the thing that we have enemies, and this is Ahriman, a diabolic and powerful Satan figure, thwarts the happiness created by Ahura Mazda, the great one true God, that by introducing evil into the world and creating savage beasts and poisonous reptiles and plants, it was therefore a religious obligation with every devout follower of Zoroaster to exterminate reptiles and other impure animals, especially serpents. Not so ecologically viable religion, is it? But it is this idea that we have enemies, and they're clearly not us. And so this included some animals and reptiles, but it also included people. Apocalypticism is about a war between cosmic entities, some of which are demonic and some of which are angelic. And ultimately you'll see Michael, the angel, fighting Satan and his legions and throwing him into the lake of fire. That's directly taken from the Zoroastrian playbook. And you find it in a number of places where it looks at this whole kind of redemption scenario or narrative based on a war between light and darkness. It's really found only in the New Testament in the book of Revelation. You can find some traces of that kind of us-them thing and mentions of an antichrist and Johnny stuff, but many antichrists have come, he says. But it's very, it's built upon the idea of a coming Savior. And Shayoshan, generically means Savior. And there are three great Shayoshanas that will come after Zoroaster, who's the prophet. So the Shayoshan from the seed of a virgin becomes impregnated while bathing. The final and ultimate of post-Zoroaster Shayoshan is to be the Ashtavateret, generally referred to as simply Shayoshan, who will lead the final battle of the children of light against the forces of darkness to ultimately banish evil. So this is one of those questions I raised in grad school. Hey, is that live? Did those people come up with this on their own simultaneously? Or is it Memorex? This is a recording and an exposure to the thoughts of other people. I'm more inclined to think it's Memorex. That basically we use what we have at hand as the building blocks to create our own theologies and metaphysics. And it's interesting to see the similarities and the differences. But in this case, the apocalypticism of Zoroastrianism is exactly the same as you find in Judaism, especially in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Daniel, and in Christianity's book of Revelation, which almost did not make it into the canon when they were voting on which scriptures were going to be official and authoritative. Anyways, I just wanted to point out that there are a number of elements that were in the ancient Near East, some that are no longer sustained by living religions. Ancient Babylonian, Egyptian religion, all died. But little elements of them all were conveyed through social contact, and they find their way, ironically, in all three of these religions, especially I think the thing that looms the largest is this apocalyptic element, that there are people that are on the side of Satan, and there are people that are on the side of God. And in apocalypticism, it becomes the duty to join the battle. And just one last thing to close with that is the remnant that we have from the Dead Sea Scrolls, called the War Scrolls. In the War Scrolls, it talks about exactly that war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. And it's very specific who it's referring to as being the sons of darkness. Who do you think it's just slightly prior and up to the time of Christ? The Dead Sea Scroll community existed up in through to the time of Christ, and they even had their own gate named after them, the Gate of the Essenes in the temple. And who do you think they thought was the greatest bearers of the darkness, who were the sons of Satan? I know what you're thinking. The Romans. Yeah. And they even literally described the battle, and before it even happened, exactly what's going to take place. They say the Romans are going to come into the holy city. They will occupy the holy city, and they will go up to the temple. And at that point, we are going to come in through the back way, and we will be joined by the legions of angels, and we will drive the Romans out into the uttermost parts of the sea. We will drive them away from here. And so when you see the cry to battle, you must join that battle and drive the Romans into the sea. And do you know what happened to that community? They were the last remnants of it fled Jerusalem. They probably joined the people fleeing who went to Masada, and the last of the Dead Sea Scroll community was finally wiped out when the Romans climb that hill. It didn't come out, didn't turn it, but they accurately predicted the war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. And they went and joined the battle, and many of them were killed. Now, it's very interesting to recognize what Jesus did, anticipating that same scenario. Do you know in the New Testament where Jesus says there will be a time coming when the armies will surround you? And what does Jesus say, join in the battle? No, he says flee to the mountains. Drop everything and go to the mountains. And you see this tells us, because of Jesus' prediction of the Jewish-Roman wars, that they were not, there was no Christians that lost their lives because they remembered the commandment of Jesus to flee and to avoid the conflict. And so it's a very interesting thing to think about that in the world situation we're in right now, where there is conflict, that it is sustained by that apocalypticism that was both in Judaism and ends up in Islam. And I do not believe that it is an essential component of Christianity. I believe Jesus was anti-apocalyptic, and I'm going to make that argument next week. But I just wanted to give you some background to see what the common language and tools they have. So it's very interesting. According to the Quran, at the day of judgment, the armies are going to be, the angels are going to come, the archangels that are going to come in with the righteous Messiah. And who is that Messiah in Islam that leads the army of light? Jesus, son of Mary. Jesus is for he is the Jewish Messiah, and he is also the only Messiah the world's ever going to get. So he is naturally going to be the Savior that leads the armies. You don't see that in the book of Revelation, but you just see some inclinations in that direction from some 2nd, 3rd century Christians. Anyways, we're going to, next week I'm going to actually revisit the relationship between Ishmael and Isaac, and to see how Jesus sort of mitigates and even tries to solve that sibling schism. So anyways, thank you for listening to me, and I'll see you next week. I could have a band come back and rock it out.